I soon came in contact with the Christian Indians living in Durban. The court interpreter, Mr. Paul, was a Roman Catholic. I made his acquaintance as also that of the late Mr. Subhan Godfrey, then a teacher under the Protestant mission and father of James Godfrey, who, as a member of the South African deputation, visited India in 1924. I likewise met the late Parsi Rustamji and the late Adamji Mia Khan about the same time. All these friends, who up to then had never met one another except on business, came ultimately into close contact, as we shall see later. Whilst I was thus widening the circle of my acquaintance, the firm received a letter from their lawyer saying that preparations should be made for the case and that Abdullah Sheth should go to Pretoria himself or send a representative. Abdullah Sheth gave me this letter to read and asked me if I would go to Pretoria. I can only say after I have understood the case from you, said I. At present I am at a loss to know what I have to do there. He thereupon asked his clerks to explain the case to me. As I began to study the case, I felt as though I ought to begin from the ABC of the subject. During the few days I had had at Zanzibar, I had been to the court to see the work there. A Parsi lawyer was examining a witness and asking him questions regarding credit and debit entries in account books. It was all Greek to me. Bookkeeping I had learnt neither at school nor during my stay in England, and the case for which I had come to South Africa was mainly about accounts. Only one who knew accounts could understand and explain it. The clerk went on talking about this debited and that credited, and I felt more and more confused. I did not know what a P-note meant. I failed to find the word in the dictionary. I revealed my ignorance to the clerk, and I learned from him that a P-note meant a promissory note. I purchased a book on bookkeeping and studied it. That gave me some confidence. I understood the case. I saw that Abdullah Sheth, who did not know how to keep accounts, had so much practical knowledge that he could quickly solve intricacies of bookkeeping. I told him that I was prepared to go to Pretoria. Where will you put up? Asked the Sheth. Wherever you want me to, said I. Then I shall write to our lawyer. He will arrange for your lodgings. I shall also write to my Memon friends there, but I would not advise you to stay with them. The other party has great influence in Pretoria. Should any one of them manage to read our private correspondence, it might do us much harm. The more you avoid familiarity with them, the better for us. I shall stay where your lawyer puts me up, or I shall find out independent lodgings. Pray don't worry. Not a soul shall know anything that is confidential between us. But I do intend cultivating the acquaintance of the other party. I should like to be friends with them. I would try, if possible, to settle the case out of court. After all, Tayyab Sheth is a relative of yours. Sheth Tayyab Haji Khan Muhammad was a near relative of Abdullah Sheth. The mention of a probable settlement somewhat startled the Sheth, I could see. But I had already been 6 or 7 days in Durban, and we now knew and understood each other. I was no longer a white elephant, so he said, Yes, I see. There would be nothing better than a settlement out of court. But we are all relatives and know one another very well indeed. Tayyab Sheth is not a man to consent to a settlement easily. With the slightest unwariness on our part, he would screw all sorts of things out of us and do us down in the end. So please think twice before you do anything. Don't be anxious about that, said I. I need not talk to Tayyab Sheth, or for that matter to anyone else, about the case. I would only suggest to him to come to an understanding and so save a lot of unnecessary litigation. On the 7th or 8th day after my arrival, I left Durban. A first-class seat was booked for me. It was usual there to pay 5 shillings extra if one needed a bedding. Abdullah Sheth insisted that I should book one bedding, but out of obstinacy and pride and with a view to saving 5 shillings, I declined. Abdullah Sheth warned me. Look now, said he, this is a different country from India. Thank God, we have enough and to spare. Please do not stint yourself in anything that you may need. I thanked him and asked him not to be anxious. The train reached Maritzburg, the capital of Natal, at about 9 p.m. Beddings used to be provided at this station. A railway servant came and asked me if I wanted one. "No," said I have one with me." He went away. But a passenger came next and looked me up and down. He saw that I was a colored man. This disturbed him. Out he went and came in again with one or two officials. They all kept quiet when another official came to me and said, "Come along, you must go to the van compartment." "But I have a first-class ticket," said I. "That doesn't matter," rejoined the other. "I tell you, you must go to the van compartment." "I tell you, I was permitted to travel in this compartment at Durban, and I insist on going on in it." "No, you won't," said the official. "You must leave this compartment, or else I shall have to call a police constable to push you out." "Yes, you may," I refused to get out voluntarily. The constable came. He took me by the hand and pushed me out. My luggage was also taken out. I refused to go to the other compartment, and the train steamed away. I went and sat in the waiting room, keeping my handbag with me and leaving the other luggage where it was. The railway authorities had taken charge of it. It was winter, and winter in the higher regions of South Africa is severely cold. Maritzburg being at a high altitude, the cold was extremely bitter. My overcoat was in my luggage, but I did not dare to ask for it, lest I should be insulted again, so I sat and shivered. There was no light in the room. A passenger came in at about midnight and possibly wanted to talk to me, but I was in no mood to talk. I began to think of my duty. Should I fight for my rights or go back to India, or should I go on to Pretoria without minding the insults and return to India after finishing the case? It would be cowardice to run back to India without fulfilling my obligation. The hardship to which I was subjected was superficial, only a symptom of the deep disease of color prejudice. I should try, if possible, to root out the disease and suffer hardships in the process. Redress for wrongs I should seek only to the extent that would be necessary for the removal of the color prejudice. So I decided to take the next available train to Pretoria. The following morning I sent a long telegram to the general manager of the railway and also informed Abdullah Sheth, who immediately met the general manager. The manager justified the conduct of the railway authorities, but informed him that he had already instructed the station master to see that I reached my destination safely. Abdullah Sheth wired to the Indian merchants in Maritzburg and to friends in other places to meet me and look after me. The merchants came to see me at the station and tried to comfort me by narrating their own hardships and explaining that what had happened to me was nothing unusual. They also said that Indians traveling first or second class had to expect trouble from railway officials and white passengers. The day was thus spent in listening to these tales of woe. The evening train arrived. There was a reserved berth for me. I now purchased at Maritzburg the bedding ticket I had refused to book at Durban. The train took me to Charlestown. The train reached Charlestown in the morning. There was no railway in those days between Charlestown and Johannesburg, but only a stagecoach, which halted at a standard turn for the night en route. I possessed a ticket for the coach, which was not cancelled by the break of the journey at Maritzburg for a day. Besides, Abdullah Sheth had sent a wire to the coach agent at Charlestown. But the agent only needed a pretext for putting me off, and so, when he discovered me to be a stranger, he said, "Your ticket is cancelled." The reason at the back of his mind was not want of accommodation, but quite another. Passengers had to be accommodated inside the coach, but as I was regarded as a coolie and looked a stranger, it would be proper, thought the leader, as the white man in charge of the coach was called, not to seat me with the white passengers. There were seats on either side of the coach box. The leader sat on one of these as a rule. Today he sat inside and gave me his seat. I knew it was sheer injustice and an insult, but I thought it better to pocket it. I could not have forced myself inside, and if I had raised a protest, the coach would have gone off without me. This would have meant the loss of another day, and heaven only knows what would have happened the next day. So, much as I fretted within myself, I prudently sat next to the coachman. At about 3 o'clock, the coach reached Per de Koop. Now the leader desired to sit where I was seated, as he wanted to smoke and possibly to have some fresh air. So he took a piece of dirty sackcloth from the driver, spread it on the footboard, and addressing me said, "Sami, you sit on this, I want to sit near the driver." The insult was more than I could bear. In fear and trembling I said to him, "It was you who seated me here, though I should have been accommodated inside. I put up with the insult. Now that you want to sit outside and smoke, you would have me sit at your feet. I will not do so, but I am prepared to sit inside." As I was struggling through these sentences, the man came down upon me and began heavily to box my ears. He seized me by the arm and tried to drag me down. I clung to the brass rails of the coach box and was determined to keep my hold even at the risk of breaking my wrist bones. The passengers were witnessing the scene, the man swearing at me, dragging and belaboring me, and I remaining still. He was strong and I was weak. Some of the passengers were moved to pity and exclaimed, "Man, let him alone, don't beat him. He is not to blame, he is right. If he can't stay there, let him come and sit with us." "No fear," cried the man, but he seemed somewhat crestfallen and stopped beating me. He let go my arm, swore at me a little more, and asking the Hottentot servant, who was sitting on the other side of the coach box, to sit on the footboard, took the seat so vacated. The passengers took their seats and, the whistle given, the coach rattled away. My heart was beating fast within my breast, and I was wondering whether I should ever reach my destination alive. The man cast an angry look at me now and then, and pointing his finger at me, growled, "Take care, let me once get to Standerton, and I shall show you what I do." I sat speechless and prayed to God to help me. After dark, we reached Standerton, and I heaved a sigh of relief on seeing some Indian faces. As soon as I got down, these friends said, "We are here to receive you and take you to Isa Sheikh's shop. We have had a telegram from Dada Abdullah." I was very glad, and we went to Sheikh Isa Haji Sumar's shop. The Sheikh and his clerks gathered round me. I told them all that I had gone through. They were very sorry to hear it and comforted me by relating to me their own bitter experiences. I wanted to inform the agent of the coach company of the whole affair. So I wrote him a letter narrating everything that had happened and drawing his attention to the threat his man had held out. I also asked for an assurance that he would accommodate me with the other passengers inside the coach when we started the next morning. To which the agent replied to this effect, "From Standerton we have a bigger coach with different men in charge. The man complained of will not be there tomorrow, and you will have a seat with the other passengers." This somewhat relieved me. I had of course no intention of proceeding against the man who had assaulted me, and so the chapter of the assault closed there. In the morning, Isa Sheikh's man took me to the coach. I got a seat and reached Johannesburg quite safely that night. Standerton is a small village and Johannesburg a big city. Abdullah Sheikh had wired to Johannesburg also and given me the name and address of Muhammad Qasam Kamruddin's firm there. Their man had come to receive me at the stage, but neither did I see him nor did he recognize me. So I decided to go to a hotel. I knew the names of several. Taking a cab, I asked to be driven to the Grand National Hotel. I saw the manager and asked for a room. He eyed me for a moment and politely saying, "I am very sorry, we are full up," bade me goodbye. So I asked the cabman to drive to Muhammad Qasam Kamruddin's shop. Here I found Abdul Ghani Sheikh expecting me, and he gave me a cordial greeting. He had a hearty laugh over the story of my experience at the hotel. "However did you expect to be admitted to a hotel?" he said. "Why not?" I asked. "You will come to know after you have stayed here a few days," said he. "Only we can live in a land like this because, for making money, we do not mind pocketing insults, and here we are." With this he narrated to me the story of the hardships of Indians in South Africa. Of Sheikh Abdul Ghani we shall know more as we proceed. He said, "This country is not for men like you. Look now, you have to go to Pretoria tomorrow. You will have to travel third class. Conditions in the Transvaal are worse than in Natal. First and second class tickets are never issued to Indians. You cannot have made persistent efforts in this direction. We have sent representations, but I confess our own men too do not want us as a rule to travel first or second." I sent for the railway regulations and read them. There was a loophole. The language of the old Transvaal enactments was not very exact or precise. That of the railway regulations was even less so. I said to the Sheikh, "I wish to go first class, and if I cannot, I shall prefer to take a cab to Pretoria, a matter of only 37 miles. Sheikh Abdul Ghani drew my attention to the extra time and money this would mean, but agreed to my proposal to travel first, and accordingly we sent a note to the station master. I mentioned in my note that I was a barrister and that I always travelled first. I also stated in the letter that I needed to reach Pretoria as early as possible, that as there was no time to await his reply, I would receive it in person at the station, and that I should expect to get a first-class ticket. There was of course a purpose behind asking for the reply in person. I thought that if the station master gave a written reply, he would certainly say no, especially because he would have his own notion of a coolie barrister. I would therefore appear before him in faultless English dress, talk to him and possibly persuade him to issue a first-class ticket. So I went to the station in a frock coat and necktie, placed a sovereign for my fare on the counter and asked for a first-class ticket. "You sent me that note?" he asked. "That is so. I shall be much obliged if you will give me a ticket. I must reach Pretoria today." He smiled and, moved to pity, said, "I am not a Transvaaler. I am a Hollander. I appreciate your feelings and you have my sympathy. I do want to give you a ticket on one condition, however, that if the God should ask you to shift to the third class, you will not involve me in the affair, by which I mean that you should not proceed against the railway company. I wish you a safe journey. I can see you are a gentleman." With these words, he booked the ticket. I thanked him and gave him the necessary assurance. Sheikh Abdul Ghani had come to see me off at the station. The incident gave him an agreeable surprise, but he warned me, saying, "I shall be thankful if you reach Pretoria all right. I am afraid the God will not leave you in peace in the first class, and even if he does, the passengers will not." I took my seat in a first-class compartment and the train started. At Germiston, the God came to examine the tickets. He was angry to find me there and signalled to me with his finger to go to the third class. I showed him my first-class ticket. "That doesn't matter," said he. "Remove to the third class." There was only one English passenger in the compartment. He took the guard to task. "What do you mean by troubling the gentleman?" he said. "Don't you see he has a first-class ticket? I do not mind in the least his travelling with me." Addressing me, he said, "You should make yourself comfortable where you are." The guard muttered, "If you want to travel with a coolie, what do I care?" and went away. At about 8 o'clock in the evening, the train reached Pretoria. I had expected someone on behalf of Dada Abdullah's attorney to meet me at Pretoria station. I knew that no Indian would be there to receive me, since I had particularly promised not to put up at an Indian house. But the attorney had sent no one. I understood later that as I had arrived on a Sunday, he could not have sent anyone without inconvenience. I was perplexed and wondered where to go, as I feared that no hotel would accept me. Pretoria station in 1893 was quite different from what it was in 1914. The lights were burning dimly. The travellers were few. I let all the other passengers go and thought that as soon as the ticket collector was fairly free, I would hand him my ticket and ask him if he could direct me to some small hotel or any other such place where I might go. Otherwise, I would spend the night at the station. I must confess I shrank from asking him even this, for I was afraid of being insulted. The station became clear of all passengers. I gave my ticket to the ticket collector and began my inquiries. He replied to me courteously, but I saw that he could not be of any considerable help. But an American Negro who was standing nearby broke into the conversation. "I see," said he, "that you are an utter stranger here, without any friends. If you will come with me, I will take you to a small hotel, of which the proprietor is an American who is very well known to me. I think he will accept you." I had my own doubts about the offer, but I thanked him and accepted his suggestion. He took me to Johnson's family hotel. He drew Mr. Johnson aside to speak to him, and the latter agreed to accommodate me for the night on condition that I should have my dinner served in my room. "I assure you," said he, "that I have no color prejudice, but I have only European custom, and if I allowed you to eat in the dining room, my guests might be offended and even go away." "Thank you," said I, "even for accommodating me for the night. I am now more or less acquainted with the conditions here, and I understand your difficulty. I do not mind your serving the dinner in my room. I hope to be able to make some other arrangement tomorrow." I was shown into a room where I now sat waiting for the dinner and musing, as I was quite alone. There were not many guests in the hotel, and I had expected the waiter to come very shortly with the dinner. Instead, Mr. Johnson appeared. He said, "I was ashamed of having asked you to have your dinner here, so I spoke to the other guests about you and asked them if they would mind your having your dinner in the dining room. They said they had no objection and that they did not mind your staying here as long as you liked. Please, therefore, come to the dining room if you will and stay here as long as you wish." I thanked him again, went to the dining room and had a hearty dinner. Next morning I called on the attorney, Mr. A.W. Baker. Abdullah Sheikh had given me some description of him, so his cordial reception did not surprise me. He received me very warmly and made kind inquiries. I explained all about myself. Thereupon he said, "We have no work for you here as a barrister, for we have engaged the best counsel. The case is a prolonged and complicated one, so I shall take your assistance only to the extent of getting necessary information. And of course you will make communication with my client easy for me, as I shall now ask for all the information I want from him through you. This is certainly an advantage. I have not yet found rooms for you. I thought I had better do so after having seen you. There is a fearful amount of color prejudice here, and therefore it is not easy to find lodgings for such as you. But I know a poor woman. She is the wife of a baker. I think she will take you and thus add to her income at the same time. Come, let us go to her place." So he took me to her house. He spoke with her privately about me, and she agreed to accept me as a boarder at 35 shillings a week. Mr. Baker, besides being an attorney, was a staunch lay preacher. He is still alive and now engaged purely in missionary work, having given up the legal profession. He is quite well-to-do. He still corresponds with me. In his letters, he always dwells on the same theme. He upholds the excellence of Christianity from various points of view and contends that it is impossible to find eternal peace unless one accepts Jesus as the only Son of God and the Savior of mankind. During the very first interview, Mr. Baker ascertained my religious views. I said to him, "I am a Hindu by birth, and yet I do not know much of Hinduism, and I know less of other religions. In fact, I do not know where I am and what is and what should be my belief. I intend to make a careful study of my own religion and, as far as I can, of other religions as well." Mr. Baker was glad to hear all this and said, "I am one of the directors of the South Africa General Mission. I have built a church at my own expense and deliver sermons in it regularly. I am free from color prejudice. I have some co-workers, and we meet at 1 o'clock every day for a few minutes and pray for peace and light. I shall be glad if you will join us there. I shall introduce you to my co-workers, who will be happy to meet you, and I dare say you will also like their company. I shall give you, besides, some religious books to read, though of course the book of books is the Holy Bible, which I would specially recommend to you." I thanked Mr. Baker and agreed to attend the 1 o'clock prayers as regularly as possible. "So I shall expect you here tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and we shall go together to pray," added Mr. Baker, and we said goodbye. I had little time for reflection just yet. I went to Mr. Johnson, paid the bill and removed to the new lodgings, where I had my lunch. The landlady was a good woman. She had cooked a vegetarian meal for me. It was not long before I made myself quite at home with the family. I next went to see the friend to whom Dada Abdullah had given me a note. From him I learnt more about the hardships of Indians in South Africa. He insisted that I should stay with him. I thanked him and told him that I had already made arrangements. He urged me not to hesitate to ask for anything I needed. It was now dark. I returned home, had my dinner, went to my room and lay there absorbed in deep thought. There was not any immediate work for me. I informed Abdullah Sheikh of it. What, I thought, can be the meaning of Mr. Baker's interest in me? What shall I gain from his religious co-workers? How far should I undertake the study of Christianity? How was I to obtain literature about Hinduism? And how was I to understand Christianity in its proper perspective without thoroughly knowing my own religion? I could come to only one conclusion. I should make a dispassionate study of all that came to me and deal with Mr. Baker's group as God might guide me. I should not think of embracing another religion before I had fully understand my own. Thus musing, I fell asleep. The next day at 1 o'clock I went to Mr. Baker's prayer meeting. There I was introduced to Miss Harris, Miss Gabb, Mr. Coates and others. Everyone kneeled down to pray and I followed suit. The prayers were supplications to God for various things according to each person's desire. Thus the usual forms were for the day to be passed peacefully or for God to open the doors of the heart. A prayer was now added for my welfare. Lord, show the path to the new brother who has come amongst us. Give him, Lord, the peace that thou hast given us. May the Lord Jesus, who has saved us, save him too. We ask all this in the name of Jesus. There was no singing of hymns or other music at these meetings. After the supplication for something special every day, we dispersed, each going to his lunch, that being the hour for it. The prayer did not take more than 5 minutes. The Misses Harris and Gabb were both elderly maiden ladies. Mr. Coates was a Quaker. The two ladies lived together and they gave me a standing invitation to 4 o'clock tea at their house every Sunday. When we met on Sundays, I used to give Mr. Coates my religious diary for the week and discuss with him the books I had read and the impression they had left on me. The ladies used to narrate their sweet experiences and talk about the peace they had found. Mr. Coates was a frank-hearted, staunch young man. We went out for walks together, and he also took me to other Christian friends. As we came closer to each other, he began to give me books of his own choice until my shelf was filled with them. He loaded me with books, as it were. In pure faith, I consented to read all these books, and as I went on reading them, we discussed them. I read a number of such books in 1893. I do not remember the names of them all, but they included the commentary of Dr. Parker of the City Temple, Pearson's Many Infallible Proofs, and Butler's Analogy. Parts of these were unintelligible to me. I liked some things in them, while I did not like others. Many infallible proofs were proofs in support of the religion of the Bible, as the author understood it. The book had no effect on me. Parker's commentary was morally stimulating, but it could not be of any help to one who had no faith in the prevalent Christian beliefs. Butler's Analogy struck me to be a very profound and difficult book which should be read 4 or 5 times to be understood properly. It seemed to me to be written with a view to converting atheists to theism. The arguments advanced in it regarding the existence of God were unnecessary for me, as I had then passed the stage of unbelief. But the arguments in proof of Jesus being the only incarnation of God and the mediator between God and man left me unmoved. But Mr. Coates was not the man easily to accept defeat. He had great affection for me. He saw round my neck the Vaishnava necklace of Tulasi beads. He thought it to be superstition and was pained by it. This superstition does not become you. Come, let me break the necklace. No, you will not. It is a sacred gift from my mother. But do you believe in it? I do not know its mysterious significance. I do not think I should come to harm if I did not wear it. But I cannot, without sufficient reason, give up a necklace that she put round my neck out of love and in the conviction that it would be conducive to my welfare. When with the passage of time it wears away and breaks of its own accord, I shall have no desire to get a new one. But this necklace cannot be broken. Mr. Coates could not appreciate my argument as he had no regard for my religion. He was looking forward to delivering me from the abyss of ignorance. He wanted to convince me that, no matter whether there was some truth in other religions, salvation was impossible for me unless I accepted Christianity, which represented the truth, and that my sins would not be washed away except by the intercession of Jesus, and that all good works were useless. Just as he introduced me to several books, he introduced me to several friends whom he regarded as staunch Christians. One of these introductions was to a family which belonged to the Plymouth Brethren, a Christian sect. Many of the contacts for which Mr. Coates was responsible were good. Most struck me as being God-fearing, but during my contact with this family, one of the Plymouth Brethren confronted me with an argument for which I was not prepared. You cannot understand the beauty of our religion. From what you say, it appears that you must be brooding over your transgressions every moment of your life, always mending them and atoning for them. How can this ceaseless cycle of action bring you redemption? You can never have peace. You admit that we are all sinners. Now look at the perfection of our belief. Our attempts at improvement and atonement are futile, and yet redemption we must have. How can we bear the burden of sin? We can but throw it on Jesus. He is the only sinless Son of God. It is His word that those who believe in Him shall have everlasting life. Therein lies God's infinite mercy. And as we believe in the atonement of Jesus, our own sins do not bind us. Sin we must. It is impossible to live in this world sinless. And therefore Jesus suffered and atoned for all the sins of mankind. Only he who accepts his great redemption can have eternal peace. Think what a life of restlessness is yours and what a promise of peace we have. The argument utterly failed to convince me. I humbly replied, if this be the Christianity acknowledged by all Christians, I cannot accept it. I do not seek redemption from the consequences of my sin. I seek to be redeemed from sin itself, or rather from the very thought of sin. Until I have attained that end, I shall be content to be restless. To which the Plymouth brother rejoined, I assure you, your attempt is fruitless. Think again over what I have said. And the brother proved as good as his word. He knowingly committed transgressions and showed me that he was undisturbed by the thought of them. But I already knew before meeting with these friends that all Christians did not believe in such a theory of atonement. Mr. Coates himself walked in the fear of God. His heart was pure, and he believed in the possibility of self-purification. The two ladies also shared this belief. Some of the books that came into my hands were full of devotion. So, although Mr. Coates was very much disturbed by this latest experience of mine, I was able to reassure him and tell him that the distorted belief of a Plymouth brother could not prejudice me against Christianity. My difficulties lay elsewhere. They were with regard to the Bible and its accepted interpretation. Before writing about Christian contacts, I must record other experiences of the same period. Sheikh Tayyab Haji Khan Muhammad had in Pretoria the same position as was enjoyed by Dada Abdullah in Natal. There was no public movement that could be conducted without him. I made his acquaintance the very first week and told him of my intention to get in touch with every Indian in Pretoria. I expressed a desire to study the conditions of Indians there and asked for his help in my work, which he gladly agreed to give. My first step was to call a meeting of all the Indians in Pretoria and to present to them a picture of their condition in the Transvaal. The meeting was held at the house of Sheikh Haji Muhammad Haji Jusab, to whom I had a letter of introduction. It was principally attended by Memon merchants, though there was a sprinkling of Hindus as well. The Hindu population in Pretoria was, as a matter of fact, very small. My speech at this meeting may be said to have been the first public speech in my life. I went fairly prepared with my subject, which was about observing truthfulness in business. I had always heard the merchants say that truth was not possible in business. I did not think so then, nor do I now. Even today there are merchant friends who contend that truth is inconsistent with business. Business, they say, is a very practical affair and truth a matter of religion. And they argue that practical affairs are one thing while religion is quite another. Pure truth, they hold, is out of the question in business. One can speak it only so far as is suitable. I strongly contested the position in my speech and awakened the merchants to a sense of their duty, which was twofold. Their responsibility to be truthful was all the greater in a foreign land, because the conduct of a few Indians was the measure of that of the millions of their fellow countrymen. I had found our people's habits to be insanitary as compared with those of Englishmen around them, and drew their attention to it. I laid stress on the necessity of forgetting all distinctions such as Hindus, Mussalmans, Parsis, Christians, Gujaratis, Madrasis, Punjabis, Sindhis, Kachis, Surtis, and so on. I suggested in conclusion the formation of an association to make representations to the authorities concerned in respect of the hardships of the Indian settlers, and offered to place at its disposal as much of my time and service as was possible. I saw that I made a considerable impression on the meeting. My speech was followed by discussion. Some offered to supply me with facts. I felt encouraged. I saw that very few amongst my audience knew English. As I felt that knowledge of English would be useful in that country, I advised those who had leisure to learn English. I told them that it was possible to learn a language even at an advanced age, and cited cases of people who had done so. I undertook, besides, to teach a class if one was started, or personally to instruct individuals desiring to learn the language. The class was not started, but 3 young men expressed their readiness to learn at their convenience and on condition that I went to their places to teach them. Of these, 2 were Mussalmans, one of them a barber and the other a clerk, and the third was a Hindu, a petty shopkeeper. I agreed to suit them all. I had no misgivings regarding my capacity to teach. My pupils might become tired, but not I. Sometimes it happened that I would go to their places only to find them engaged in their business. None of the 3 desired a deep study of English, but 2 may be said to have made fairly good progress in about 8 months. 2 learnt enough to keep accounts and write ordinary business letters. The barber's ambition was confined to acquiring just enough English for dealing with his customers. As a result of their studies, 2 of the pupils were equipped for making a fair income. I was satisfied with the result of the meeting. It was decided to hold such meetings, as far as I remember, once a week or maybe once a month. These were held more or less regularly, and on these occasions there was a free exchange of ideas. The result was that there was now in Pretoria no Indian I did not know or whose condition I was not acquainted with. This prompted me in turn to make the acquaintance of a British agent in Pretoria, Mr. Jacobus de Wet. He had sympathy for the Indians, but he had very little influence. However, he agreed to help us as best as he could, and invited me to meet him whenever I wished. I now communicated with the railway authorities and told them that even under their own regulations, the disabilities about travelling under which the Indians laboured could not be justified. I got a letter in reply to the effect that first and second class tickets would be issued to Indians who were properly dressed. This was far from giving adequate relief, as it rested with the station master to decide who was properly dressed. The British agent showed me some papers dealing with Indian affairs. Tayyab Sheth had also given me similar papers. I learned from them how cruelly the Indians were hounded out from the Orange Free State. In short, my stay in Pretoria enabled me to make a deep study of the social, economic and political condition of the Indians in the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. I had no idea that this study was to be of invaluable service to me in the future, for I had thought of returning home by the end of the year, or even earlier if the case was finished before the year was out. But God disposed otherwise. It would be out of place here to describe fully the condition of Indians in the Transvaal and Orange Free State. I would suggest that those who wish to have a full idea of it may turn to my History of Satyagraha in South Africa. It is, however, necessary to give here a brief outline. In the Orange Free State, the Indians were deprived of all their rights by a special law enacted in 1888 or even earlier. If they chose to stay there, they could do so only to serve as waiters in hotels or to pursue some other such menial calling. The traders were driven away with a nominal compensation. They made representations and petitions, but in vain. A very stringent enactment was passed in the Transvaal in 1885. It was slightly amended in 1886, and it was provided under the amended law that all Indians should pay a poll tax of £3 as a fee for entry into the Transvaal. They might not own land except in locations set apart for them, and in practice even that was not to be ownership. They had no franchise. All this was under the special law for Asiatics, to whom the laws for the coloured people were also applied. Under these latter, Indians might not walk on public footpaths and might not move out of doors after 9 p.m. without a permit. The enforcement of this last regulation was elastic so far as the Indians were concerned. Those who passed as Arabs were, as a matter of favour, exempted from it. The exemption thus naturally depended on the sweet will of the police. I had to experience the effect of both these regulations. I often went out at night for a walk with Mr. Coates, and we rarely got back home much before 10 o'clock. What if the police arrested me? Mr. Coates was more concerned about this than I. He had to issue passes to his negro servants, but how could he give one to me? Only a master might issue a permit to a servant. If I had wanted one, and even if Mr. Coates had been ready to give it, he could not have done so, for it would have been fraud. So, Mr. Coates or some friend of his took me to the state attorney, Dr. Krause. We turned out to be the barristers of the same inn. The fact that I needed a pass to enable me to be out of doors after 9 p.m. was too much for him. He expressed sympathy for me. Instead of ordering for me a pass, he gave me a letter authorizing me to be out of doors at all hours without police interference. I always kept this letter on me whenever I went out. The fact that I never had to make use of it was a mere accident. Dr. Krause invited me to his place, and we may be said to have become friends. I occasionally called on him, and it was through him that I was introduced to his more famous brother, who was public prosecutor in Johannesburg. During the Boer War, he was court-martialed for conspiring to murder an English officer and was sentenced to imprisonment for 7 years. He was also disbarred by the benchers. On the termination of hostilities, he was released and, being honourably readmitted to the Transvaal bar, resumed practice. These connections were useful to me later on in my public life and simplified much of my work. The consequences of the regulation regarding the use of footpaths were rather serious for me. I always went out for a walk through President Street to an open plain. President Kruger's house was in this street. A very modest, unostentatious building without a garden and not distinguishable from other houses in its neighborhood. The houses of many of the millionaires in Pretoria were far more pretentious and were surrounded by gardens. Indeed, President Kruger's simplicity was proverbial. Only the presence of a police patrol before the house indicated that it belonged to some official. I nearly always went along the footpath past this patrol without the slightest hitch or hindrance. Now the man on duty used to be changed from time to time. Once one of these men, without giving me the slightest warning, without even asking me to leave the footpath, pushed and kicked me into the street. I was dismayed. Before I could question him as to his behavior, Mr. Coates, who happened to be passing the spot on horseback, hailed me and said, "Gandhi, I have seen everything. I shall gladly be your witness in court if you proceed against the man. I am very sorry you have been so rudely assaulted." "You need not be sorry," I said. "What does the poor man know? All colored people are the same to him. He no doubt treats Negroes just as he has treated me. I have made it a rule not to go to court in respect of any personal grievance, so I do not intend to proceed against him." "That is just like you," said Mr. Coates, "but do think it over again. We must teach such men a lesson." He then spoke to the policeman and reprimanded him. I could not follow their talk as it was in Dutch, the policeman being a Boer, but he apologized to me, for which there was no need. I had already forgiven him. But I never again went through this street. There would be other men coming in this man's place, and, ignorance of the incident, they would behave likewise. Why should I unnecessarily court another kick? I therefore selected a different walk. The incident deepened my feeling for the Indian settlers. I discussed with them the advisability of making a test case if it were found necessary to do so, after having seen the British agent in the matter of these regulations. I thus made an intimate study of the hard condition of the Indian settlers, not only by reading and hearing about it, but by personal experience. I saw that South Africa was no country for a self-respecting Indian, and my mind became more and more occupied with the question as to how this state of things might be improved. But my principal duty for the moment was to attend to the case of Dada Abdullah.